just recognize that it's okay to have goals for yourself. Don't be shy about what you want to do. Maybe it's not a financial goal. Maybe it's an impact goal. I want to touch this many lives. I want to help this many people. I want to go to these parts of the world. But have that list. I always look at people when they go on their vacations and they say, oh, I'm going to climb this mountain. I'm going to visit this church. I'm going to see these ruins. And then for your life, you're like, where's your life plan? And they're like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't have a life plan. I'm just kind of going, taking it day by day. Right? I'd like people just to put down 5 things that they want for their own life, right? 5 outcomes, and then work towards them, because you'll find that when you put down something on paper or you put it down on your device and then you look at it on a regular basis, you're more likely to achieve that or get close to the goal than if you just don't articulate, what am I here for? And that word that I told you
hmm
earlier, that impact, what is the impact you want to make? What is the legacy you want to leave? How do you want people to remember, the value that you brought to your corner of the world? That's important. And I think if people took that serious when they're younger and then they went for it, they'd have a great experience, just like that great vacation.
Welcome back to the next episode of the Venture Podcast. I'm so grateful to be joined by Claudette McGowan today. Claudette is the founder of Protexxa, a cybersecurity company. But before that, she held a lot of incredibly prominent roles at places like BMO, at places like TD, and even at places at Deloitte, where she started off her career. So I think it's going to be an awesome experience to interview her, and I'm very excited to have you on the show, Claudette.
Thank you. Thrilled to be here, Bryce.
No, for sure. Thank you. And Claudette, a great place to start would be early on your career. Usually with our guests, we ask them about, the people that they were growing up. And I'd love to hear about your childhood and what that was like. Most of your career was spent in tech. Was there any formidable experiences you had as a kid that really brought you to want to pursue this, as a career and as a passion for your life?
Yeah, great question, Bryce. I think I grew up with parents that were in the services industry, and specifically, my mother was a nurse. And so, first of all, I saw her have this like super cool outfit she'd go to work in with the uniform. And then, just the things that she'd be doing, healing people, helping people. She was very active in the church as well, too. So I think sometimes, as much as we want to resist, we're different from our parents. I think what I grew up kind of seeing others help others was very powerful. And I think that's a big part of who I am and how I'm shaped. And so the direction from my mother was maybe not nursing or maybe not healthcare. And she kind of painted the picture of, there's a different side to it as well too, and thought, you know, explore other things. And so it was a blank. It wasn't like go into tech. It was just other things she thought I should explore. And I found my love of tech really when I bought my first computer and saw it was that window to the world, all the things I could do, the speed, just the access. And since I got that first computer, there was no looking back.
That's awesome. Which computer did you have when you started off?
Oh my gosh. I think it was like a 386 processor or something crazy like that. Like Bryce, you wouldn't know about these things. You're way too young. But yeah, it was a basic computer. And I was just like the word processing. I think that was a big thing for me. Is like, oh my gosh, you just have to like write it once and then you print it and it's good. Because there's a time when you had like carbon in between papers and two-sided tape, and you had all these things and you have to fix things. So just being able to do things in the fly,
Yeah,
that little bit of speed that it gave you, I got really really engaged by it and wanted to know and explore more.
that's awesome. And I would definitely second that. And it feels like we're almost heading into like the second or third stage of that of productivity with AI now, and what that's going to unlock. I feel like most of my days are spent writing code, and I feel like I'm coding probably like maybe 3 times faster than I was before. So no, I definitely understand the productivity and just like moving faster. Can I translate your
Yeah,
ideas better?
having access to things like Copilot, right? Things like Copilot are really powerful as well too, right? You're like
Exactly.
before Copilot and then after Copilot. How are you getting more productive as a result of new innovation?
Exactly. And I honestly I haven't used a ton of like Microsoft's Copilot features. but I've used more of the just other third party solutions with like the coding side of things. But it is definitely a game changer. It's definitely a game changer, and we're going to talk about that a bit this episode as well about Protexxa cybersecurity products, a bit about Defender, and how they're incorporating AI in some unique ways as well. Um, but before we get there, I'd love to talk a bit about early on in your career. If I'm not mistaken, you started off at Deloitte. I would love to hear about your experience there. I did an internship there, and I know something that was super powerful for me was the fact that I was exposed to a ton of different companies and seeing a ton of different problems in a short time span. So for me at that time, when I didn't really know what I wanted to do, it kind of allowed me to like narrow my view and align on, I wanted to be focused on tech. I wanted to be focused on AI. And this was, pre chat GPT. I like to say that a little before, a lot of the hype. But I'd love to hear about your experience back then and perhaps how that shaped your role into the cybersecurity and IT world.
Yeah, so my role at Deloitte was in technology. So I've been in technology for the majority of my career, I have to tell you. So it was very much things like help desk and field services, so almost like the entry level of tech. Being able to create things around how people use it and automating the way that they work. That was really powerful. I was able to do some innovative things like launch something called Backup Day because people were losing their data to different things at the time. So I was happy to be able to even innovate and talk about being like an entrepreneur, coming up with this whole concept, and my leaders at the time saying that's awesome and this can help the whole organization. And then of course then that was my first time as a supervisor and a manager, and so that was where I got my first
Yeah.
kind of nod to lead teams, and the support that they gave me, whether it was specialized training, opportunity to practice, opportunity to fail and learn and course correct. A lot of those kind of early leadership years happened at Deloitte, in a great company because it's so complex, whether it's consulting or tax or audit. You're seeing so many disciplines under the same roof, and you saw that partnership structure. So how you go from like associate to top of the pile, and understanding kind of what experiences are needed, and the more kind of tools you had in your kit, the more I saw people get opportunities. So I also learned have many dimensions to yourself, right? Don't be like a one trick animal. Be able to learn new things and stay on top of technology and innovation. That was really something I learned at Deloitte.
For sure, I definitely second that. You mentioned that was your first nod to lead teams and move into more of a managerial role. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and perhaps some challenges that you faced along the way. Were there people that were mentors that maybe helped, with this process and this transition? Because I feel like this is a position a lot of people would aspire to be in to lead teams and
Yeah.
take that next step. And what was that next step like for you?
Yeah, well, first of all, when you go from being the colleague and coworker to being the leader and supervisor or manager, just expect to not be invited to any of the cool parties anymore. So that's the first thing to prepare yourselves. That you're like, oh, where's everybody going? Oh, nowhere. So that was an interesting thing because now you're on the other side, right? Either you're part of the bullpen or you're like leading. So I thought that was really interesting. But no, seriously, what it was is just there were these opportunities that most people would run away from. I always talk about the fire, right? Like where this something's hot and maybe it's about to explode, and most people would run away from those things. I was always curious about them, and I think my leaders liked that because that looks like initiative, and that looks like persistence. And so I got tapped on the shoulder. It wasn't like I applied for the role. I was told like, "Hey, we see this stuff. You're demonstrating this consistently, and we have an opportunity, and we'd like to extend this opportunity to you." So that was one of the first times I say in my career where it wasn't like fill out the application, and it was really about somebody seeing your potential and saying, "Let me make a bet on Claudette." So that was important, I think, in my career, and something I've seen a few other times. And the other thing I think it was when you talk about, well, what did I learn? I did learn that we have to be compassionate when it comes to people, that everybody's experience is different, that people approach work in different ways. So, Bryce, you have a way of doing things, and you probably think that's the best way to do it, or it's worked for you, it's got you to where you are today. But there's somebody who can have the same outcome, but they'll approach it differently. Their path will be different. And so I really appreciated the difference of work styles, and also the milestones of people's lives, like when they were getting married or when they had a child. or when they lost a parent or a pet, that compassion piece is
Mm.
really important too, because people are now working in dual mode and they have some big things that are happening outside the work. How do you as a leader support them? And then the last thing I'll say is you realize that you don't do anything as yourself as a leader. And if you don't have good relations with the people on your team, you probably won't have good results either, because they're either working with you or
Mm.
maybe not working as much with you.
It's a great point. Um, something that actually made me think of something as well. I know you're doing a lot of work, kind of jumping to the present day for a second here. You mentioned earlier on in the podcast, you're high up on an advisory role at Mars. You founded the Firehood as well, an initiative that's really supporting female entrepreneurs in the Canadian ecosystem. When you were starting out back then, even though maybe these are corporate and entrepreneurial worlds, so maybe they're a little different. How is your opinion of how to best support and help young people in their careers changed, perhaps from when you were a young person and you said, "Oh, I wish I had these things," but now maybe you're later on and you're actually providing these things to some younger people. How has that kind of changed for you?
Yeah, so I think I didn't see as many examples in my career of women in tech that looked like me, but I had people who didn't look like me, who weren't women, who were very, very helpful. So mentors are really, really important to have. And mentors happen mostly due to either programs that are formal or more because someone sees you and takes a liking to you or sees potential in you, or sometimes they see themselves in you. And I've had men say, I was just like you at your age. And so they don't have to match your image, but I do think it's
Mm.
important that you have mentors that have walked a little bit of the path that you intend to walk as well too. So mentorship has been very, very key in my career. Sponsorship has been very key. And the difference to me is, your sponsor is in rooms that you're not going to be in, and they're going to be advocating for you. So you've never been able to promote
Yes.
yourself, or I know you were valedictorian at your school. This is not something that you picked yourself. Somebody was in a room and they said, hey, Bryce is going to be the person. You had people who were sponsoring you and they saw that potential. So knowing like who's advocating for me when I'm not in the room, who's saying, you know what, I'm willing to take the chance. So that's a big part of the career. And so when I think about, well, what do people need today and why am I so passionate about it? It's because I didn't necessarily have as much of it as I would have loved at the time. And so I think part of our role as leaders is to make sure like there is a pipeline behind us and that there are people who are going to move into these roles. You don't want to be like, out of my cold, dead hands, I'm going to hold on to this and no one's ever going to get this power. No, you want to make sure that you can share the power because people bring different perspectives. So I love being able to mentor and sponsor people. And I always tell people, no matter where you are in your career, there's somebody who's looking at you going, man, I wish I went to this school, or I wish I was able to get into this program, or I wish I was able to get into this internship. You are ahead of somebody else. And so you can be a sponsor, you could be a mentor to that individual too.
That's a great point. Regardless of where you are in your career, you could probably do that. Where I'd like to move next. So after Deloitte, you then moved into you moved to corporations. You went to BMO. You rose the ranks very very high through BMO all the way to the C level. I'd love for you to give us an overview of that process. When you entered the organization, was that always a goal? Did you say, "Hey, I want to be a leader in the corporation. I want to maybe make it all the way there," or was it more so a day to day approach? How did you really approach that? And can you maybe give us an overview of those years at BMO?
Yeah, so my goal was I'd like to stay 3 years at BMO. I think that'll be cool, and then I'll go on to something else. 19 years later, I walked out of the building. So the thing about big organizations like Bank of Montreal and others is that there's many different lines of business. So there's different geographies, there's different divisions, and so it's like a city, like it's a whole community, and so you can kind of get these new opportunities. You meet new people. I remember being in my 11th year and someone saying, "Oh, are you new to the bank?" And like, what? I've been here for 11 years, but because it's such a big organization, if you move from Laval to somewhere in Vancouver, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, this person might be new. You're not really familiar with them, or BMO has a massive operation in the United States as well too. So you could be in Milwaukee, you could be in Chicago, you can be in New York. So that's one of the things I thought was great about working in a company like that. I came there as a leader, so I was I believe hired as a senior manager when I joined Bank of Montreal. And then it was
Mhm.
successive kind of promotions, new opportunities. And I think a lot of that had to do with doing different things, Bryce. Putting my hand up for yeah, I'll go to Milwaukee and help with the integration, or I'll go help with the consolidation of call centers. So I got to do some really fun projects, and it was always stretching myself and almost to the point of discomfort. And I remember leaving technology for almost a year to go work in risk. And risk management is very different than being an operator in the front lines. And so I didn't have a big team. I'd always had like a big team before to do things. And in this case, it was kind of like, you're going to be an individual contributor. We're going to give you maybe one or two people to help you along. But that was like a roll up the sleeves, learn something new, work with different people. And it was one of the tougher exercises I ever had to do, the most uncomfortable. But then right after I finished that, I was promoted to vice president. And so there was a lesson in there for me like, hey, listen, sometimes when you're not the best and you have to kind of claw your way up and learn new things, that's when you're hungrier. And that's when it's like, sink or swim, right? And then for me, it was like, I'm going to
Yeah.
swim. I'll find a way to make this work. And I had great mentors and people to help me through that transition. But from going on as a frontline technology leader to what is like second line into to risk, that was very, very different, but very rewarding and something that to this day
Mhm.
helps shape who I am and the decisions I make and the filters I put things through before I come up with the results.
Can you talk to us a bit about some of those filters and how to be, I guess, a better decision maker, especially as the decisions you're making are more high risk for a big company like Bank of Montreal?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing, most people, when they make a decision, they go, well, what's best for me, right? Like, how am I going to get the win out of
Yeah.
this? When you're working for a big company like that, you ask yourself, what's best for the customer? And I could give you a simple example of being like in a call center and it's like lunchtime and a call comes through and it's a customer, and if you're in a group where the customer is calling because they probably have a problem or something that's working, do you say, hey, it's lunch and I just jump out for lunch, or do you take the call so that the customer can go back to doing what they're doing because perhaps calling you at 12 o'clock in the day wasn't part of their plan when they woke up? And so there's little decision points. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, is my sandwich more important at this time, or is it giving the customer 5 minutes of my time? That's at the micro level. But to me, when we make decisions, when we shape strategy, is the customer at the center of what we're doing? Are we on the right side? Is
Mhm.
it ethical what we're doing? Is this, for me today, is it the secure path, right? Is this, there's two ways to do something. This way is quick and it's going to maybe deliver a win, but it's not going to be the secure or the ethical path, then we don't take that path. And so these are things that when no one's looking, how do you make decisions? I ask myself, is the customer at the center? Am I thinking about what's best for the organization? Am I thinking about what's best from a security perspective? And then I also now spend a lot of time thinking
Mhm.
about national and international security too. Sometimes things might be good for
Yeah.
one nation, but not good for the world. And so those are things to consider.
That's incredible. And from there, so Claudette was the CIO at BMO, Bank of Montreal, for our non-Canadian listeners who don't know the full name. And then she went to TD, where she was the global executive officer at TD. You brought up something as well, and I still would like to cover a bit about your time at TD. But you talked about putting the customer at the center of everything that you do. I feel like this is something that's preached so much in the entrepreneurial world, that you're building for your customer's the sole focus. And I guess I'm wondering at the time, now this seems like um, such commonplace. It's something that's repeated a lot. I feel in a lot of entrepreneurial circles, but back then, I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't as much. So how did you come to this realization that customers are at the center? Was this more of a thing that you observed by yourself, or was this something that maybe perhaps you read about, or maybe it was passed on from BMO's organization? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, it's certainly part of the strategy, but I also think it's part of my personal ethos from whatever I was doing at Deloitte and saying, hey,
Yeah.
people are losing their data because, maybe the hard drive failed or something that was mechanical or technical. So, what can I do to help solve that? Okay, let's create something called backup day and make sure everybody has a picture. There was no cloud then, right? So, let's make sure everybody has a picture of all their
Yeah.
data and they can get it from a secondary source. That was important to me. It was absolutely, from the Bank of Montreal's perspective, customer at the center of everything. But what does that mean when you're in tax? What does this mean when you're in legal? What does
Hmm.
it mean when you're in a support function? So I think frontline people get it, right? But when you go through an organization, sometimes you have more people who are supporting than you have on the front lines. So you have to make sure that all those supporting functions are doing things, building process, looking at procedure to say, does this get the customer the answer as quickly as possible? Does this get them the best return that they're looking for at the speed that they're looking for? That's where I think there needs to be some support. And so I was in technology, so something as simple as, what's the SLA? What's the service level agreement between partners? Because when you're in
Hmm.
tech, it's like, okay, I get the hardware from here, and I get the software from here, and I get the network from here. Well, how does it all work together? So when you're designing that service delivery kind of offering, all those partners, all those contracts have to support putting the customer at the center of everything. So if you call,
Yeah.
Dell for your hardware, do you want them to get back to you in 4 hours or 4 minutes? That's a process design, right?
Hmm.
If when you call for support,
Yeah.
do you want to wait? What's the average speed of answer? What, 20 seconds or 20 minutes? So that's, again, how do you
Mm.
staff that? How do you embed the things that support those types of outcomes? That's what I'm referring to, the customer at the center. It's not just the smile and the hello when they get to the counter. And you've been there before where someone's like, the systems, the computer, and you're like, hold on, you work for the same company, and they're talking about some back end function, but it's to you, you're like, it's all one organization. So that is design, that is engineering, that's architecture of the experience that you want for people on the front end. So I agree with you, Bryce. A lot of people speak about it, but then when you ask them, show me the processes that support that outcome, that's probably where they're going to have to go back and sharpen the pencil.
For sure, for sure. And I think that would be a great time, Claudette, to also transition into your global executive officer role at TD. Could you maybe compare Bank of Montreal versus TD? How did the customer demands shift and how did your approach shift, perhaps in your strategy, the filters that you were putting on when you were assessing these problems and creating these strategies? What
Yeah.
was the difference between those two banks?
Both very service oriented banks. So I mean, TD is known for the comfy couch, right? Like that, it was all about convenience, and I think that they won many awards. I believe JD Power awards for being like the top when it
Mhm.
comes to service. So natural evolution for me to go there. So I wouldn't say there was any difference. I think they were both very laser focused on service and customer. Um, for
Mhm.
me, my mandate there was really doubling down on cyber. So I was one of the CIOs at BMO, kind of accountable for all the endpoint, the laptops, the desktops, the servers, the email system, the collaboration tools. But all those things need to be
Mhm.
connected and protected. And so when I went to TD, I
Yes.
really double clicked on the protection piece and joined the enterprise protection team, and then was able to kind of think about how do we help our 20 plus million customers there? How do we help our 100,000 employees there? How do we, support this $1 trillion bank? And so I would say uh, the governance, the risk, the compliance that supports that was even
Mhm.
more. I would say just the focus on that was there. I would say so. I really enjoyed working there too, and working with my partners in operational risk and privacy and legal, and because I had something called the Fusion Center,
Sure.
which was bringing different disciplines together to support physical security, digital security, fraud, you name it. We were like focused on bringing those things together, and it was very powerful. So I love that kind of integrated approach.
No, for sure. Brought up protection being a super important thing in that cyber strategy. In the world, I think more than ever, cybersecurity is something that's looked at as being incredibly important. If it was before, and I think even more so now. For some reasons we'll get to later on this podcast, we'll do a bit of a technical deep dive. But I would argue that this is probably a few decades ago. Cybersecurity was probably very reactive, and it's kind of taken the form of being more of a proactive thing, where a lot of companies are doing things like red teaming and trying to detect vulnerabilities in their systems before they get exploited. And I think it's incredible the fact that you said I'm a executive officer at one of the biggest banks in the world, but I'm actually going to do a startup because that's the next journey, the next step in my journey. And I'd love to talk I'd love to hear a little bit more about, how you made the leap to because that's a big leap to take. But before we go there, how did you think about the field of cybersecurity, and how did you maybe rethink of building it from the ground up, or taking a different approach? What was your unique insight that led you to believe that, hey, cybersecurity is good, but I think we can do it better by building Protexxa?
Yeah. So when I think about, cybersecurity of yesteryear, it was all about protecting the four walls of an organization, right? Everybody used to come into the
Hmm.
office. They get access to the office network. They do all this stuff. When I started my career, there was desktop computers. There was no laptop, so it was like you came in, you worked on the big box, you went home, and you came back. And then, of course, things have evolved over the years. Um, and then the perimeter has evolved, right? So now people are working from anywhere. You see someone in the Starbucks and they're having a business call. I just had a meeting with somebody who was like, "Oh, I'm just getting on the plane." They were in their seat for as long as they could connect with us, and they were doing business and speaking on a full plane, all right, about some of the things that we were working on.
Yeah.
And so people are working on the go. So how do I keep them safe when it's not just my network? Because in that case, it was my network where I am. It was her network on the plane. It was all these different things that are in the middle. So the other thing that I found quite remarkable is that every time we hear about one of these cyber attacks or hacks, 85 to 90% of the time it happened through a person. So I send you a note, Bryce, and you click on the
Mm.
link. Well, I've got some malware in there, and now I've infected your device and perhaps your whole network as well too. I didn't have to do much, but just get you to click on the link, or I can call the help desk of another company and say, hey, you know what? My name is Bill Smith, and I'd like you to reset my password. And this very helpful agent is going to reset the password, maybe even set up multi-factor authentication. I should highlight I have a voice changer on. That's why I sound like Bill Smith. But then, and then all of a sudden, I've got access to the network. So this
Yeah.
cyber threats are escalating since the pandemic. Since we all went home to work, cyber crime has quadrupled.
Hmm.
And so, why did I start
Mm.
this in the middle of what was the pandemic? Was because I recognize that everyday citizens don't have what we had at the banks. And everybody was working in a
Mm.
different way, and no one got training. No one said, okay, so for you to work at home, or for you to work from the coffee shop, or you to work from the airport, here's what you need. And so I really want to build a business that focuses on the human side of cybersecurity. And the last thing I'll say is
Mm.
I wanted to make an impact. So as you get older, Bryce, you're going to realize like I got the car, I got the house, I got all these things, but then there's still something
Yeah.
more that's missing. And for me, I'm like, how can I
Yeah.
make a bigger impact? And when I was brought to the attention that there are 5 billion people on the internet, as much as I loved helping the millions, there was an opportunity to help billions of people. And it seems like I remember someone looking at me going, billions, come on, is that real? And now I look at some of the
Yeah.
things we're doing this morning, starting the my morning with a meeting with the prime minister saying, okay, I want you to come in our country and help us with this. And this is one of many prime ministers and presidents I now know because of me putting a shingle up and saying, I'm going to start a company. I'm going to focus on the 5 billion. I'm
Yeah.
going to help everybody who wants my help worldwide. That's why I'm in 10 different countries
Hmm.
today, right? So that's it.
That's
The
awesome.
impact I can make as a business owner, hiring the people I want, setting the strategy I want, and going after it. That is where I want to spend the rest of my life.
That's incredible. I think so many people can learn from that as well. It's like whether you just graduated from university, or maybe you're someone who's listening to our podcast who's later on in their career. It can be a good time to start a business at any time in your career if you think that it's something that you're passionate about, and if you want to make that impact. So I think that's a great lesson. Thank you. Something that as well I wanted to cover was the fact that Claudette has raised the most amount of money by Black women in Canadian history. um, that's right, Claudette?
VC funding. It's on record. There might be someone who did it
Most amount,
secretly, but everyone told me. I read it
most
I
amount of
read it when I
VC
raised
funding
5 million, and then I raised 10.
ever. Exactly. Like that is an incredible accomplishment. Um, and I think I think for women, I think for Black women too. Like I think it's something that a lot of people can look up to, and it can say, hey, like there's space in the ecosystem for you, and you got to just go for it. So I think that's incredible. and I wanted to make that of note as well. I think now would be an interesting time to go into a bit of a semi-technical deep dive. I know that since you started the company, we've had this AI boom. Obviously, consumer applications like ChatGPT. Now we're starting to see a lot more AI being used in enterprise, but also a lot more AI being used for hacking and actions that are not good and that try to compromise systems. So I guess I'd love to ask you, how do you think AI will transform cybersecurity in the years to come? And what steps is Protexxa taking to implement AI as a part of their strategy?
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence is being used by the good guys and the not so good guys. In that, let's take the good guys first of all. We are
Yeah.
using artificial intelligence to look for anomalies. So Bryce normally logs in at 8 a.m. from Toronto every morning, but now he's in San Francisco logging in at 1 a.m. What's going on? Did Bryce move,
Mhm.
or is somebody got his credentials? Well,
Mhm.
instead of us going through logs, because there was a time when people would manually go through the logs. Well, now we're using AI to go through logs to identify the anomaly and then to help with the remediation if there is anything, to block things automatically when you see a change in pattern, and then have the person kind of come back and say, here's what's going on. And it's for any transaction. So remember, now coming from a bank with billions and billions and trillions of transactions, well, you need that speed. You need that automation. We're using it for things like you mentioned, like penetration testing. So there's great companies like Pantera who are doing using AI to do pen testing. So on applications, on systems, we're doing things from a network perspective. So yes, artificial intelligence is very, very powerful. And I love what we're doing around threat hunting as well. So if you have the indicators of compromise from another breach somewhere else, you can now apply it to yours and have automated tools to do the finding of this. The mindset around cybersecurity has changed. You must assume breach. Like you
Mm.
should not be. I don't like overconfident tech and cyber leaders. Like, oh no, this will never happen
Yeah.
here. I'm just like set my watch to it. It will happen, especially when you're speaking publicly and saying things won't happen. So you need to use
Yeah.
automated tools to protect yourself. Now, what are the threat actors doing? The threat actors are using it for malware. They're using it for phishing and social engineering. They're using it, in LLMs. So again, they can do like LLM poisoning and just put in things that like are feeding and training the model to learn the wrong thing. So that when you put your query in there, your prompt, you're getting things out that are quite destructive. So there's so many different ways that we can use AI in a not so powerful, not so good way. And so you have to be fighting, fire with fire. So when you don't have an AI strategy in a company, or you're not thinking about where it fits into your roadmap, that is problematic in my perspective. You should be using
Yeah.
artificial intelligence not just for productivity, but also for protection.
No, for sure. That yes, for sure. Um, Something that just popped into my mind as well. Since I moved to the Bay and in my, I guess, entrepreneurial, just life in general, I think something that's emphasized in a lot of software companies is scalability and making products that can scale. So per unit output, your cost to produce that isn't really increasing. I guess I have some questions about the AI that you're building. A lot of companies are focused on things like training data. That's been a huge emphasis, maybe even synthetic data. um, and for you, is that something that you have to accumulate on a per company basis and you make customized solutions per company, or is it more so like this is the Protexxa Defender product, it adapts to most companies? What is your approach there, and how did you, I guess, make go through the decision making process to shape what that looks like?
Yeah, from our perspective, I mean, there's so much out there when it comes to breach data. So being able to get a view of what's out there. And also, we're learning from our customers. So as they're using our tools and they have their questions, we're able to apply that to some of the models. But I'll give you a good example of how we use a reverse image search technology within the platform to find your face anywhere online. Now, I can
Mm.
Google and I can go to DuckDuckGo. I can go to many different, search engines to find everything I can about you, Bryce. I can go to haveibeenpawned.com to take your email. What we decided was that we were going to build technology that can help you find and fix vulnerabilities in minutes, right? So the time that it takes someone just to do one
Mm.
search, what we're doing is scanning surface to deep and to some extent having access to the dark web to now provide you with that level of visibility. And then what if I find a picture of you that's not you? And it someone who just really looks like you. Well, that's where we're training, and the learning takes place for the model to say, okay, more images like this, where Bryce had said it's him, go look for more of that versus this one where he said it isn't. So there's some interaction with the user to say, hey, this is me, this is me, this is not me. And then we continue to search for more
Yeah.
iterations of you. And then the last thing I would say is the finding is interesting. Like I compare it to going to the doctor and saying, okay, well, you got high blood pressure, you got, that we're seeing diabetes, you're pre-diabetic, they're giving you all this news. And you go, okay, so doctor, what do I do? And they say, sorry, I can only tell you the problem. We didn't want to be in the telling you the problem. We wanted to be in the finding and the fixing. So we'll find things about your digital identity, about maybe gaps in your cyber hygiene, where's your password online, and then our goal is to help you to remediate. So for everything that we find, we made sure that there was a fix and something that also is like a teachable moment. So we're not just like fixing it automatically and you don't know what's happening, but also doing this thing where, hey, if your social media is completely public, we'll surface that up, but then we'll say, now here's how you make it private. And then you can tell other people about that as well too,
Mm,
because I believe we are not a cyber literate nation. We're not a cyber literate planet, but I have the aspiration to make us a cyber literate planet and to go to the point where we are like immune, right? As much as we could be from digital attacks. How does that become the goal? And maybe you fall short of it, but you're a lot closer than where you were when you were doing nothing. And a lot of people are like, I don't really know much about cyber. So I always ask the question on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being don't know anything, you're horrible, to 10, know everything and have no vulnerabilities. Where do you think you are? So I'll ask you, Bryce, where do you think you are? 1 to 10.
Oh, I I would say I'm probably about a 6 or 7, I would say.
6 or 7. See, that's a pretty high one that
I
I
think
get. I
I,
usually get
yeah,
like
I think
two
I,
or three. But here's what I can tell you: I've never met a 10.
yeah,
And I speak to cyber experts with all the three
yes,
letter
that's a
acronyms.
great
I'm
point.
in the FBI, the CIA, all those places, but no one says they're a 10. So that tells them we're not a digitally confident nation, or we're actually aware of the fact that there's so
Yeah.
many threats out there, and some we can prevent, others we can't. But here's what we can do: let's not make it easy for
Hmm.
cyber criminals. Let's do as much as we can to protect ourselves. And so that's the business that we're in, is helping people really elevate their level of cyber literacy.
Incredible, incredible. The next question I would like to ask about in this technology segment has to do with quantum computing. Full disclosure, I am no quantum computing expert, but in the Bay, I've been surrounded by it a bit. A lot of this stuff is in R&D phases, but in the next decade, we could probably expect these things to be used at many organizations. And my question there was, with quantum computers, traditional encryption mechanisms that would otherwise secure your data or secure just systems in general could be breached in ways that they couldn't before. And as you described, that kind of 4x of activity that increased during the pandemic, that could likely increase for even more. So obviously it's a business opportunity, but then it's also perhaps might require a change of strategy. Have you thought when that time comes how that strategy will change, or is that something that is too far down the line where it's like once the technology is almost there, then we'll develop strategy around that? What's your approach and strategic way of thinking about something like that?
Yeah, my approach is definitely to be ahead of the game. There are many companies who
Yeah.
thought AI was this faraway thing, and then all of a sudden, GTP came, and then everybody in their organization was using it, and they didn't have an AI strategy, they didn't have an AI policy.
Mm.
People were taking proprietary information and putting it in, saying, "Please reword this. Give me new words for the annual, report." You're like, "What? You can't put that. Where's it going?" And so I am
Yeah.
an advocate for doing as much as early as possible. So we are absolutely working on some things right now, specifically a quantum resistant wallet around digital identity is
Mm.
something that's very key for us. But also just like you said, get educated, right? Get quantum literate, and just maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's 10 years, but don't wait for it to be on CNN and CP24 for you to say, "Oh, we better do something about
It's
it."
too late.
But that the horse has left the barn. So I am an advocate for just trying to get educated about it as much as you can right now, and then to do things to say like, you know, how ready are we? where are the gaps? What are our digital crown jewels? And if encryption is broken, are we fixing everything at the same clip, or is there two things that we have to make sure those things have extra protections around them? So doing a little bit of an inventory is important at this point, doing some form of an assessment and thinking about what are the roles of the future. So we're working with one of the governments right now on saying, what before 10 years ago, did you ever hear about a prompt engineer 10 years ago? 5 years ago, did you hear about a prompt
Nope.
engineer? So recently, everybody's telling me I'm going to be a prompt engineer and I'm doing this boot camp, and that's wonderful. But my question is, what are the jobs that are going to come as a result of quantum computing? Well, we're going to need
Mm.
quantum researchers, and we're going to need people to do quantum hardware type support. We're going to need quantum software. There's so many different things that are going to, quantum literacy coaches, right? There's going to be all these things
Yeah.
that we're rushing to get on AI now to say, why don't we prepare for that? So we're helping a government kind of get quantum ready. But what can you do today? Take the inventory of everything that you have, understand, especially when it comes to credentials and authentication, what controls you have in place, and what would hurt you the most if all of a sudden there was this, you know, quantum GPT comes to an office near you. What are you going to do? That's really my advice: is don't wait for the article.
Yeah, and that's great advice for any leader in an organization, but also any person as well. If you're a lot of our people who watch our podcast are people who have just graduated university, and I think that's a big thing. Like, try to think about the future. What will the future need? And if you can align yourself somewhere in there, you'll probably be very happy. You'll probably have a job, maybe a bit more job security. But yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll tell you about this really cool company that I know of called X Atoms. There's a company called X Atoms. The three founders,
I know this
they're
company.
20,
Yeah,
20 something years old
Diana
from UT.
Verjakova.
Yeah, Diane, amazing, right? So
Yeah.
Shirley, the phenomenal team, and they're doing quantum chemistry. So when you just tweak my brain to say, yeah, if you're thinking of building something new, right, this would be a good domain to explore, and it could be like a collaboration. It's not just pure quantum computing, but apply it to different disciplines as well too. I think there's a great opportunity there. So yeah, you should get Diana and the team on your podcast to talk about what they built. At
Yes.
Startup Fest, they won the top three awards, right? Best of the Fest. They won the women's the Firehood women's pitch competition, and they also won the youth competition as well too. So imagine going to a pitch competition and going home
Wow.
with three trophies, $500,000, because they
Wow.
thought, how could we, deliver clean water quicker, and they came up with the quantum chemistry solution.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And I think we're just at the very beginning of that. Like, the same excitement that we're feeling with AI and what
Yeah,
that's doing, and that's still at its infancy stage. I think it's probably going to be the same thing all over again in 10 years, even maybe
yeah,
even less for the quantum world. I do look forward to that because this has been pretty cool to live, and it feels like almost like I'm in the .com bubble. I wasn't really like, I don't know if I was alive for that yet. I don't think I was alive for that yet, but like, I feel like that's what it would have felt like.
that's
And if I
right.
was born back then, I probably would have wished that I did a startup in the .com era. So that's kind of what feeds into my psychology of like why I'm going to do it now.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. That's right. And you can do it. That's it. It just takes
Thank you.
someone saying, "I'm going to go for it," and maybe the first one isn't great, or maybe the first one is great, but you got to go for it. There's nobody successful sitting on their couch not doing anything.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree. Um, I'd love for you to maybe talk about some advice that you would give some of our younger audience members. For context, we have a lot of people who watch our podcast who are either in their final years of university or just graduated and are entering the workforce. Perhaps they're trying to figure out exactly what they want to do and what they want to dedicate their life to, and that will probably evolve over their career. But I'd love for you to maybe give some advice to those people. If you were, my age, if you were 21 right now, what would you do? How would you approach life? How would you approach work? And what would you do? I guess.
Yeah, the first thing my advice that you'll see documented everywhere is just be bold and be courageous. And there's a lot
Yeah.
of young people who they're in their head, or they're like, who wants to hear from me? Or they don't realize that when you're in the room, like that's the opportunity. Work the room, join the association, join, the industry group, and just go out there, because you don't realize that when you have somebody who's young coming forward, it's like this potential. You're looking for someone like who's going to grab the baton and run the next mile. So use your youth as your strategic advantage, right? You have time, you have energy, go out there and make your mark. Second thing I would say, network, network, network. So I heard when I was 21 years old, a gentleman came from the US and he said, if you don't network, you might not work. And we all laughed and we thought it was
Mm.
funny. But the people with deep networks, they are the ones who go into the collaboration opportunities. They're the ones who get the call. They're the ones who get the tap on the shoulder. So please go out there and network. I'm in the financial services. They're called FSISAC. It's information sharing groups, right? So that we get to know what's happening in areas. Be a part of whatever your industry chapter is or affiliation. That's really key too. And then also
Mm.
just recognize that it's okay to have goals for yourself. Don't be shy about what you want to do. I know people, maybe it's not a financial goal, maybe it's an impact goal. I want to touch this many lives, I want to help this many people, I want to go to these parts of the world. But have that list. I always look at people when they go on their vacations and they say, oh, I'm going to climb this mountain, I'm going to visit this church, I'm going to do like see these ruins. And then for your life, you're like, where's your life plan? And they're like, oh, I
Yeah.
don't have a life plan. I'm just kind of going, taking it day by day. Right? I'd like people just to put down 5 things that they want for their own life, right? 5 outcomes, and then work towards them, because you'll find that when you put down something on paper or you put it down on your device and then you look at it on a regular basis, you're more likely to achieve that or get close to the goal than if you just don't articulate, what am I here for? And that word I told you
Hmm.
earlier, that impact, what is the impact you want to make? What is the legacy you want to leave? How do you want people to remember, the value that you brought to your corner of the world? That's important. And I think if people took that serious when they're younger and then they went for it, they'd have a great experience, just like that great vacation.
Wow. I think that's a good place to maybe end the podcast. That was awesome. Um, I guess, but before I do end it, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you would maybe like to address, share with our audience? Please let me know. The floor is yours.
I think I covered it, but I'll just reemphasize. Right now, 8 billion people on Earth, 5 billion of us using the internet, and more than 50% of us are compromised, hacked, breached, whatever the word is, attacked. We have to take action individually. Protect yourselves in every way possible. What does that look like? Using multi-factor authentication, usually an authentication app would be great. Having secure passwords or passphrases, having good password hygiene, going to private social media versus public. Those are the types of things that you can do to protect yourself.